Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's interview. Today, I'm really excited. I am talking to the one and only Bob Dillner. Bob, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. We're all, working to get racing back alive again in America, and it's good to see it finally happen because we went too long without racing, so it's really neat to see all different forms of racing happening again here.
I completely agree with that, and that's it's awesome because I feel like you're one of. We'll get into it more in the interview, but I feel like you're one of those people at the forefront of it. Since there's so many of those local tracks now starting to open back up and all. So, as a race fan, we really appreciate what you do for us.
Oh, thank you. It's listen. My dad always said, work hard and do what you love because we have this old, phrase, in racing that, hey, we used to do fencing for a living and do drainage for a living. And
Mm-hmm.
we used to do a lot of ditches, my dad. And he goes, anything's got to be better than digging ditches. So I always, tell guys what my dad always preached to me: work hard, and that way you don't have to dig any ditches anymore.
Yes, sir. So tell us about your start in motorsports journalism. Also, were there any journalists who you looked up to or who inspired you to get into it?
The funny thing is, it just happened by happenstance for me because I was awful in school and a C student, and I would certainly recommend people, put a little bit more effort than I did.
Mm-hmm.
But because of some of those poor grades, quite honestly, I was punished a bunch, and all I could do was read or write. I sat in my room, and that's all I could do. So I wrote some stories about racing. I think I was 15 years old, and my mom and dad found them when they came into my room at one point and read them and said, hey, they're pretty good. And my mom suggested if that's what you like doing, because we went to the racetrack as a family every weekend, why don't you send them into a couple of those trade papers that you read every week? So I sent it in, and 2 weeks later, I got a call from Area Auto Racing News out of Trenton, New Jersey. And they said, hey, Bobby, would you like to write a couple of stories? How old are you, by the way? And I lied. I said, I'm 16 because I knew if I was going to have a chance to do this, I would need to be 16 years old at the
Yeah.
time in the NASCAR pits. And luckily, I was tall. So I passed for 16 and got my first NASCAR license and started riding, and everything developed from there.
Wow. That's definitely not the traditional route at all. So.
Yeah, it's not. You asked about the people that I looked up to. Back in the day, when I first began that, I would look up to guys like Bones Boucher. He was a writer up in the north that I really loved. Just Gary London from Gator Race News and some other people. They were so good, and I love reading all the stuff that they did. But a little bit later on in my and quite honestly, I know that there were people I looked up to. It was just people I knew and I listened to. And Steve Burns was a good friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
Watched him on Inside Winston Cup Racing back in the day, and he taught me a lot. And unfortunately, we lost him several years ago to cancer. But he made a profound impact on my life. A guy like Dave Despain and Dick Berggren and how they approached their craft.
Mm-hmm.
But the big person I think that I learned a lot from, or I hope I did, was for sure Ken Squire. Ken had just a certain way with delivering his, dialect that it really resonated with me. And I think it certainly made an impact on so many people around America, and how he would say, the kid from Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was, common men doing extraordinary things in race cars. Just the way he delivered things. And I got to become friends with Ken for, a long time. And we still are friends and text and call, a couple of times each and every year, even though he's retired and back up in Vermont. We still keep in touch.
Mm-hmm.
And those type of people really made me realize, even though journalism and broadcasting is so much different, I hope that I'm a little bit more of a throwback to that style
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to what we see out of the media these days.
Yeah, I feel like so much of it nowadays when you see it's I know one thing that stands out to me is almost like it's sound bites here and there. And I know even for us, like our local media when they would cover races, you would just get, oh, so and so won or whatever. And I think one thing that a lot of those guys had in common, as well as a lot of the pit reporters like yourself, was that as a fan, I went from the point to where it was there's a race to here's the stories that are unfolding. You've got 43 different stories that are about to be told in the next 3 hours, and that's when it really took off for me, thinking, wow, there's way more than just here's some cars turning left, for 3 hours. It's more of, oh, is this guy going to finally get his top 20 finish? Is this guy going to keep up his hot streak, or whatever? So.
And I think the big thing to realize there is what we do is not a right, and we don't deserve to be there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? We have a job to accomplish, and we try to do that to the best of our ability, but we're blessed to be there. We should be honored to do what we do, whether it be at Saturday Night Short Track or the NASCAR Cup Series. And I don't mean that by saying putting NASCAR up on a pedestal,
mm-hmm.
but we need to treat people with respect and not say, well, why won't you answer my question?
Yeah.
I don't like that. I don't like what I'm hearing and seeing and feeling sometimes out of the media. Listen, I got into a spat with Bill Elliott back in the day because at one point he had a tough outing, dominated the race at Kansas, and wound up finishing second or third because of some mishaps.
Mm-hmm.
And after the race, I saw him and I said, Bill, can I get you? And he goes, I guess. And so I started asking him questions, and he gave me, like 2 and 3 word answers, and wound up, walking with him. And, my cameraman wound up hitting a fence and that sort of thing. And later on, I saw Jim Hunter, who was also unfortunately passed on by since this time.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, a NASCAR PR man for so long. And he saw that I was mad, and I was young at the time. And he said, Bob, why are you so mad? And I said, you're a darn 10, 11-time most popular driver. That's why. He said, what happened? And I explained to him. And the next week, we came to, I think it was Charlotte, and Bill had another good run. And my cameraman and I looked at each other and said, we're going to get Bill first.
Mm-hmm.
By golly, we're going to get him, because we were aggravated. And Bill kept on looking at me. Mike Ford was his crew chief, and he'd talk to Mike, but keep on looking at me. And he gets out of the car, and he looks at me, and he said, you going to throw me under the bus again? And I said, are you going to do the interview? And he goes, I guess. And after that point, I had an understanding that, listen, Tony Stewart and I have gotten into these arguments several times.
Mm-hmm.
We're there to do a job. They're there to do a job. But if they don't want to talk, that's okay. And we should not hold them accountable
mm-hmm.
as long as they are polite in which they deliver the message to us. And Tony and I call him stubborn. He calls me stubborn. And it's okay. We're both passionate about the job that we have to do, but we're more understanding. Tony tells me, when I know you show up, I know you mean business, that you're not there to bother me.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can get that mutual respect with drivers, and I've had my go-arounds with some drivers, but at the same time, you're not there to hype anything that needs overhyped. You're
mm-hmm.
there to sell what we love, and that's racing. But you're there to do a job, and they were there to do a job as well.
I was telling one of my friends before this interview that's one thing that I've loved about this is getting to try to look at someone's story and think, well, what are 5 questions that I can ask to be able to tell their story? And I was talking with, I forget who it was, but a couple of weeks ago after one of the interviews, me and one of the guests were shooting the breeze, and we were just talking about how there's so many drivers out there that they hate doing interviews because they're faced with either the people that ask the same generic questions every single time, or try to throw out some gotcha or try to get some kind of headline like, hey, tell me about the driver you hate the most. And for me, it makes sense to me why so many drivers are like, I don't really want to go and do some random interview when that's all you're being faced with is almost, all right, well, what are they going to try to trick me into saying in this interview now?
Yeah, I sometimes that's kind of like really rough.
Mm-hmm.
And drivers have gotten smart and they understand that. And listen, back in the day, Randy LaJoy, 2-time NASCAR Busch Series champion, joked around with me and said, Bob, and he used a different word, but you're a crap stir. And I said, no, Randy, I'm just trying to get both sides.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would do is, I don't want the driver to know if one driver says something about somebody. When I go to that driver, I'll ask them the regular generic question of like what happened or whatever. But afterwards, I'll say, listen, Buckshot Jones said this about you, Randy,
mm-hmm.
about the incident. What's your reaction to that? And that's not stirring anything. That's giving them a fair opportunity to respond rather than putting both sound bites up and the other driver didn't even know what that other person said.
Yeah.
So that's the approach I've always tried to take.
So you've already mentioned a couple, but for a lot of my followers, like myself, we know you best from your time with NASCAR. Are there any other moments or interviews that stand out as either your favorite or maybe your most memorable one?
Yeah, I've had a couple of really cool things and a couple of unfortunate circumstances I've been in. I remember when Carl Edwards went to go, technically fake punch Matt Kenseth, and we were live in the middle of an interview at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And, been in the middle of fights where, heck, a crew member accidentally grabbed me because I was in the middle of it. Those have been times that I've been like, whoa, what's going on here? But I'm 6'6", and I can handle myself. That's
mm-hmm.
okay. But I think, honestly, that the story that really makes me proud of, what I've done and what my dad raised me to do is some stories around Dale Earnhardt Sr. I remember calling my dad when he won the 500, and I got to interview him. I said, Dad, because of what you did and taking me to the track, you helped me get here. Or, when Dale grabbed me by the shoulders in the pits, and he said, good job, kid.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, whoa, Dale Earnhardt Sr. just told me good job. But the biggest thing was, and this is off the track, I remember I brought my daughter, who was maybe 4 or 5 years old at the time, to the pits in a test at Charlotte Motor Speedway.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a 65 Chevy C10 pickup truck. And it was primered up. I was fixing it up at the time. And we got in the cab, and we're about to pull out. And Dale, pulls next to me, looks at me, and he goes, nice truck, smiles and pulls off. And I'm like, whoa, Dale Earnhardt Sr. loves my truck, So we pull out, and we wound up in a little bit of traffic. I think it was around, rush hour or whatever around this area. And all of a sudden, somebody's tailgating me. And I'm like, by golly, what's going on? And I got mad. I gave him a little brake check. And all of a sudden, this truck pulls up next to me, and it's Dale Earnhardt Sr., and he smiles at me again, and he takes off. Well, I think it's so great, and I take off after him, and we go down this road called Concord Farms Road here, just up the block from the Speedway a couple of miles,
mm-hmm.
and it gets windy, and he's got this brand new Chevy pickup truck, and I got this old 60s Chevy, and I'm just dealing with the suspension on it, and through the turns, he pulls off from me, and all of a sudden I hear like, boom, and it's my daughter, and she kind of slid up against the door, and back in that time, which was like, 20 years ago,
mm-hmm.
So didn't have seatbelts in it because I was just fixing it up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, honey, are you okay? And she's like, I'm fine, Daddy. But that's kind of cool that I could say that, I've raced down the streets of Concord, North Carolina with Dale Earnhardt Sr.
Yeah. Man, it's those kind of stories that you hear often about Dale Sr., and I think it just builds into that whole who he was as a person, and you saw him on the track for who he is, but it's those kind of stories that really just it brings up his legacy and who he was.
Yeah, he was special. I remember at one point over, J.R. Rhodes was his PR guy, and JR's got this big crowd, this huge crowd, and something happened with Dale, and this huge crowd in the back of the hauler.
Mm-hmm.
And JR comes out, he'll be right out. And I looked at my cameraman, I said, he ain't coming out the back door. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, he ain't coming out the back door, follow me. So at Dover, there's like a little grassy hill in front of the hauler that leads up to some stairs where you can have a quick escape route. So I went up the grass and around the hauler, and I waited there. And all of a sudden, here comes Dale, didn't go out the back door, tried to avoid the media, And he comes around the corner, looks, smiles, shrugs his shoulders, and goes, "Got me. What do you want to ask?" So sometimes you got to be a little bit, you got to be a Nostradamus and guess what's going to happen so you can catch some of these guys. And it's not because they were trying to avoid people in terms of answering for the fans. It was because something probably happened. They were a little bit fed up and they just wanted to go and get out for a while. And that's understandable as well. So it's always fun kind of talking about how you learned how to do certain things and how to deal with certain things. And I dealt with the best of times and the worst of times in my 17 years in NASCAR. And, having fun on the short tracks and still doing a little consulting in terms of, within the NASCAR realm. So it's really interesting to have the perspective now, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. And, whether people liked me or they didn't, I was always there because I had the love for racing and tell the stories and the news stories of stuff that was going on.
So from writing columns to pit reporting to leading broadcasts, you've worn a lot of hats in the industry. Is there a position that you would say has been your favorite?
No, honestly, not at all, because I've loved every single position that I've been in because it's all different. And a lot of people ask me, well, how do I get my start in racing, or what should I do? And I said, learn it all, because I've produced, I've edited, I've been a cameraman. It doesn't matter. And my son is coming up through the ranks now. He's already been a pit reporter for not only P51, which is our company covering short track racing, but also MAV TV. And I make him do every single position within TV to make yourself better. I remember Caitlin Vincey when she was coming through the ranks, and she would ask me tons of questions. And, at first I was reluctant to answer her for, the fear that, this talented, very good looking lady would wind up, taking my job. And coincidentally, she pretty much did. But that's okay. That's the evolution of things. I'm very happy with where I'm at. Caitlin and I, we don't talk as often as we probably like, because our jobs are separate, areas. But, we tweet back and forth, and it's interesting, just to see, because I think people need to be well-rounded these days, and I think a lot of people are not.
So, speaking of Speed 51, how did it begin? And can you tell us a little bit about the growth and the success that you found with your website?
Well, Speed 51 was born out of the fact that I was laid off by TNN back in the day when they were getting out of motorsport. And I had, other than the ASA series, which they continued with for, and I had nothing else to do. And there really wasn't much on the web in terms of short track racing, because, the internet, other than J-Ski, was kind of new at that time. So besides J-Ski with Cup, we kind of became the short track source with Speed 51. And it's now, it began in 2001 and really started with a small portion of the United States and grew to nationwide. So it's really neat to see that grow. And then last year, several of the Cup owners that are through the Race Team Alliance, they acquired Speed 51. And they became, a part of what we do. And we have a great partnership now on delivering the messages and the exposure for short track racing with all that we do. So they're very excited about it, because they knew that there was a disconnect between NASCAR and grassroots racing. So what they did with us with Speed 51 is they wanted to reconnect. And you've only seen a tip of what we will be able to accomplish through the efforts of what we're able to do, and have their backing as well. I'm really excited about the future with Speed 51, whether it be broadcasting or storytelling through stories and everything.
That's true. I know as a fan growing up, like you said, I would turn to J-Ski for all of my stuff, but it probably wasn't until when Junior started doing his Dell Junior download, that I started paying attention to these drivers, like in the modifieds and all, because these people would start in the Xfinity series or Cup series or whatever, and I'd be like, oh, it must be a new guy. But these other people online would say, man, I've been watching him for the past 5 or 10 years, and I'm thinking, man, I've missed out on so much of this guy's career because all I'm doing is waiting till they get that cup ride or that truck series ride or whatever. So that's one thing I've enjoyed about the site is getting to pick up on these people earlier in their career and be along for the ride as they go through the ranks.
Yeah, it's been neat to see the progression of so many people. From Jamie McMurray to Joey Logano and Martin Truex Jr. and Kyle Busch and Brad Keselowski. The list goes on in terms of the future superstars at that time when they were young, and us covering them, Chase Elliott and William Byron, Ryan Blaney, Christopher Bell. I mean, the list is just immense.
Mm-hmm.
And we have something called the short track draft that coincides the same time as the NFL draft, where we rank expert panel of like 50 to 75 people turn in their votes for the short track draft every year. And then we have the top 100 selections. And, Chase Elliott was a former number one pick. Ryan Blaney picked on Chase. Well, I didn't get the pick. The highest I ever was 4 on the ranking. So it's neat to see their engagement. Mm-hmm. I speak to several of them all the time. They still love short track racing, and it's neat to be able to see what we were able to do as a company with Speed 51 for their careers, and in turn, the passion that they show towards Speed 51, which was so important in their development as well.
Mm-hmm. So for fans like myself who don't have local racing near us, is there a particular series or track or whatever on speed51.com that you would suggest as an introduction to what local short track racing looks like?
There's a lot of good super late model series around America, and there's a lot of good racing in general. Late model stock cars, street stocks, you name it. But everybody knows, listen, I'm a big fan of super late model racing. Mm-hmm. And talking about the step right before you would go to ARCA or maybe a truck ride. Mm-hmm. And you can some of the best young talent battle with some of the KGO veterans around these, series like the Southern Super Series, the Champion Racing Association, the ARCA Midwest Tour, PASS up in the Northeast, the Granite State Pro Stock Series, SRL out west. And a lot of the other individual independent shows as well, like the Snowball Derby held down in Pensacola each and every first weekend of December of the year. I think that, in terms of pavement racing is very important. And then you have a lot of great, dirt tracks around America as well. You look at the kids running at Millbridge Speedway or, the Ultimate Super Late Model Series. And then I'm also involved with MAV TV and the Lucas family and their Lucas on a Late Model Dirt Series. Honestly, bar none, in America is the most exciting, most competitive racing series, pavement or dirt, in this country. And I have the privilege of being able to be on the broadcast team for all 26, 30 shows, whatever we do every year. It seems to be growing each and every year. I get to do that for MAV TV, which I think is an up-and-coming leader in motorsport television. Mm-hmm. And that is, for sure, the most excited I get at the racetrack each and every year. Other than that Snowball Derby, every show with the Lucas Oil Late Model Dirt Series is spectacular.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely enjoy the recommendation, and I'll have to check that out whenever I get an opportunity. I know during the quarantine I've been watching a lot more MAV TV, especially like I've always loved the ARCA series, so I'll find me a good ARCA race from 2 or 3 years ago and be like, okay, I'll settle in for a couple of hours and check this out.
Yeah, it's exciting. The ARCA Menard series, and we're getting ready to get cranked up again here in the month of July with the live broadcast of ARCA on MAV TV. But you see the rising young stars. This year we have Haley Deegan battling for a championship in the ARCA Menard series against a veteran, Michael Self. And we see people like Corey Heim and so many other good drivers, Carson Hocevar, Ty Gibbs, Chandler Smith. Christian Eckes, last year's champion, has moved on to the Truck Series with Kyle Busch. It's certainly a great breeding ground. To get a big old heavier stock car, whether you come for dirt or pavement, it's a good training ground for getting you to the NASCAR Big Three.
Mm-hmm. So, well, thank you very much for joining us today, Bob. I have really appreciated it.
Hey, no problem whatsoever. It's a lot of fun talking about this, and it's neat to see where racing has progressed to, and through Speed 51 and MAV TV and the Lucas Oil family, we'll continue to do as much as we can.